Like many New England cities, Fitchburg, Massachusetts was born out of the Industrial Revolution. The waters of the Nashua River would provide the power for mills and also be the lifeblood here in the production of paper for more than 100 years. Other industries would also find their home in Fitchburg, including the manufacture of bicycles, firearms, and yarn. The General Electric Company would employ hundreds, building steam turbines for producing electricity and powering wartime ships. Agriculture from outlying communities would find its way here to be dispatched across the Northeast by rail, along with other finished goods that flowed out of the many factories in the River Valley. Over the years, cities like this, for better or worse, have changed. No longer are they the manufacturing centers of days past. Generations have come and gone. But for those who have called this city their lifelong home, there is one thing that holds it all together: the strength of the people, lifelong friendships, and family. This is their common bond.
I think my number one thing would just be hardworking people, and number two, great traditions for a city that was, it was a great place to grow up as a kid, and met a lot of friends that you still see all the time. No matter where you go in the city, you always know somebody.
Oh, I have great pride in the city of Fitchburg. If somebody were to say to me, "Here's, $500,000, do it over again," would you do it over again? I'd say no.
I feel more positive now than I did before, because of the people.
You can probably say we've been here all our lives and why, but we don't really have any need or reason to go anywhere else.
Community and success go hand in hand in Fitchburg. People helping each other and having pride in the city is an everyday thing for those who live here.
We all have to be born somewhere, and I don't know what the percentage is of people that are born in a particular community stay there. But I think part of it is why people stay is because it's home.
The city has been a success because the generation that brought me up worked hard, made sure their kids got an education, and then went on. A lot of them did leave, but some stayed.
Pride is still there. I've been in Fitchburg for 63 of my 66 years, and I do feel a sense of pride.
I'm proud to be part of the Fitchburg Fire Department, proud to still be a part of the community, and I don't know what the future holds for me, but Fitchburg is my hometown.
It's been great for me. I met my husband here. I've raised two lovely children who are doing well, and so I most definitely would do it over again.
It's kind of discouraging when people bad talk Fitchburg like it's a bad place to live, or it's not. It's a community, and like any other community, we have our problems, but I think overall it's a good place to live.
A unique mix of nationalities has made this city a melting pot. People have come here from all over to work, live, and raise their families together. Fitchburg has always featured beautiful public spaces, notable architecture, and paid tribute to those who have served the city and our country.
And walking up Main Street when I was kind of young, I do remember going to the Universal Theater, which was in Lower Main Street. I believe it was 25 cents at that time to get in. And the Fitchburg Theater, where we used to go as kids and see a lot of shows. And an interesting thing I remember about the Fitchburg Theater as we became a little bit older, and I used to go there with some friends rather than go there with my sister, it was quite fun to, when we did this often, I bet we did this a half a dozen times. I'm surprised they never caught on to us, but we would pay one of our friends to go in. And it wasn't much money. I think it was 10 cents or 25 cents. And there were iron stairs that went up the side of the theater to the balcony. And we would all just walk up the iron stairs, and when our friend got in, he'd open the doors, and we'd all go in. There was about 6 or 7 of us. So that was great fun, doing that, hoping that we weren't going to get caught and get kicked out.
We didn't go to Fitchburg High, we went to Monty Tech. So, but on Thanksgiving morning, it's Fitchburg all the way. You know?
We went to the Fitchburg game. I mean, Monty Tech didn't play a Thanksgiving Day game back when we went to high school.
They played they would play the...
We would probably still have been in Fitchburg, you know, because it's the Fitchburg Leominster, and we take pride in Fitchburg. Yeah. That's where we grew up. It's our home, and we're very proud. I'm very proud of Fitchburg, you know. Chosen to live here all my life, you know.
Cut me, I bleed red, not blue. Yeah.
50 years ago, Fitchburg would celebrate 200 years of families, industry, and education. In the years after World War II, the country saw growth and opportunity. The young families that lived and worked in this central New England city would be at the center of this changing America.
My father was called the gentle giant. He didn't say much, but when he did say something, you listened. He had a very, very wild Irish temper when you got him going. I used to watch him go out to work in the morning and see him come home at night, and he would sit down, and when I was 12 or 13 years old, he'd tell me what, you know, transpired for the day and what he did and what happened in the city. I took the police exam because my dad wanted me to take it, and I took the exam, and I got appointed. Back then it was called, I was an EEA employee, emergency employee, that before you took the test they hired certain people, and I got on and I took the test and passed the test, and then I had to make a decision. Did I want to be a teacher or did I want to be a police officer? So after sitting down and talking to my dad about certain aspects of the job, and he convinced me that the road to go is to be a police officer, and he was 100% right. I was appointed July 1st of 1972. Walked into the Fitchburg Police Department, and Captain Vernon Keaton, who was the captain, gave me a gun, gave me a badge, and said, hit the street. That's how I started. Hit the street. No training, no nothing. Hit the street. I worked the first Civic Day parade in 1972, and the first call that I had was a disturbance up at the War Monument and Monument Park. And I was there, and I was there with another rookie, Dave Barnacle, came on with me. And what do we do? What do we do? we're just going to have to use common sense and see if we can rectify the problem. That's what we're going to do.
I was in the Kingsman Drum and Bugle Corps for a number of years in the late 60s. That was always a good time. You know, we traveled all over the state, sometimes all over New England. I remember going up to Portland, Maine for competition. So you get to meet a lot of kids. I'm sure you remember, Scott, the old rule was when you went out of the house in the morning, it's come home when the street lights come on. And you'd go to Walton Street Playground and play. And that's what you did. You stayed out, you were outside all day long. There was, you know, we weren't sitting around playing computer games. you were out of the house and go do some physical activity, whether you played baseball at the Sandlot on Walton Street or basketball at the Walton Street Playground. And then you'd venture out sometimes and go down to the elementary schools. There was a lot of them, and you got to know the kids from the other schools, Salem Street, Edgerly, 2 in Ashburnham Street. So we'd go and play the flag football games down at Crocker Field on the side of the bleachers now, where I think the JVs or something practiced there. There was a tennis court, and that's where we played flag football on Fridays after school.
Everybody went to Main Street. Everything was there. Woolworths and Kresge's became Jupiter, I think, later. Grant's was there. I worked on Main Street when I was in high school. I worked at Liggett's drugstore on the soda fountain. And I remember I'm trying to think what year it was, maybe 67 or 68, there was a flood.
When I was in grammar school, it was about hanging around, well, assuming I wasn't in school and I didn't miss too many days, it was hanging around with your friends. And that was the beauty of Fitchburg when I was growing up. It was the neighborhoods. And it was wonderful back then because the times were innocent. We would go out in the morning, would say goodbye to my mother, and as long as we were home by dark, she didn't care. And she knew we were safe because all the local mothers would take care of us and they'd take turns. And back then, you know, and we lived in the glory years of the 50s and the 60s, is everyone had a job. There were no divorces back then. There were no temptations like there are today. So it was really an innocent time and a fun time, and you know, we would spend as much time outside as possible.
My earliest memories, I have to say it's going out and just being with other friends and being able to stay out until the street lights came on.
Immigrants would come from all over the world, making this city their home, and building families that would stay in Fitchburg for generations.
Well, my grandfather came to Fitchburg pretty much in the early 1900s. And my grandfather right away found a job as a mason working on the 5th Street Bridge. He was responsible for mixing a lot of the cement that went into that bridge. After that, he got a job at the Goodnow Iron Foundry on Water Street. I believe it was in the area of where Market Basket is today. While he was working those 2 jobs, he kept a very large garden and raised some small animals like chickens and rabbits. And he would sell produce to neighbors and occasionally sell some of the eggs and other products to some of the stores right downtown.
My father worked at the mills in Claiborne, walked to work every day up and down Oak Hill Road, Plymouth Street, were hills, and he worked at S&E, which was a division of Hedstrom Union. Another, you know, making doll carriages and strollers and all kinds. Sold in all 48 states, right there down the street. The same thing with the shoe manufacturings like Anwelt, Claiborne Shoe, Independent Lock, Yale Lock and Key. So my dad worked at S&E, my mother worked at Comfort Slipper. My
heritage is Italian, and my mother actually and her family came over from Sicily in 1925. So my mother was 3 years old when she came over. And she met my father. So my mother's maiden name was Femino, and my father's name was Cephalo. And both of those families had little grocery stores in town, in the Patch on Water Street, and that's how the 2 of them met.
My grandfather I was born up in New Brunswick, moved to Concord, New Hampshire, and then I'm not sure at what age moved to Fitchburg. He was a door-to-door life insurance salesman, raised 10 children, 6 boys and 4 girls, and for him it was all about education, especially educating the men in the family.
My dad's parents were immigrants. They were Swedish, but they were living in Finland. There was a Swedish section of Finland, and I guess that was fairly common. So that's where they came from. Matter of fact, my grandfather, I hardly ever heard him speak English. My father, when we would go down to see them, they lived at the lower end of Bond Street. He would speak a few words in Swedish, but he always looked old to me. My mother's parents were Boston area. Her maiden name was Chase, and he worked. My mother's father worked in a bank in Boston, and my grandmother, as almost all women were back then, were a homemaker. My dad was born in Fitchburg. He was born in a house that is no longer there, right around the corner from where FATV is right now. So that's where he came from. He was always here. My mother was born in Dorchester, and she was a registered nurse and came to Fitchburg to take a job as registered nurse at Fitchburg Paper Company, which is where my dad worked, and the rest is history. Matter of fact, she was the first nurse at Fitchburg Paper Company, and for quite a while was the only nurse there. So that's how they came here, and that's how they met.
My dad obviously worked for the Sentinel for many years. Started off in a factory, taught himself photography, and then did a little freelance photography, and then kind of got into working for the newspaper.
Yeah, I worked for the Telegram for a little while, but Telegram didn't want to give him benefits. You know, they would give him an hourly or a weekly paycheck. The Sentinel came along and said, you know, we'll pick you up as our full-time photographer, and we'll give you benefits, which meant a lot, because he had a large family.
6 of us,
yeah. So he needed the benefits. He became the Sentinel photographer, and he had the late 50s, early 60s. I forget the exact year.
Growing up in Fitchburg back, I remember a lot in the 60s, the early 60s. The crazy things you think of today, simple things like going downtown shopping with my mother. My mother didn't have a license. She would take us downtown, and you'd go to Park Snows, and they had an elevator. And they had a guy sitting there that ran the elevator. That was like one of the greatest things. They later put in a escalator, which is even better. I think it was the only escalator and elevator in the city of Fitchburg at the time.
Well, I have memories of going down to Main Street for old-fashioned bargain days in particular. That was great fun. But also the movie theater. We would go on Friday and Saturday evenings, and really enjoyed that. And another big spot was Rogers Department Store. That was such a neat, I don't know if you remember that store, but it was so neat. They had the slips that could go through those cases and go through the building. I just thought that was really neat. So we spent a lot of time downtown. I also remember after cheering at Crocker Field, walking from there over to the produce store at night.
Well, there were periods of time when I did want to leave, and I did pursue other avenues, other stations, because there was always Worcester, there was always Boston, Providence, Hartford. Hartford was always good, even New Haven. And I had friends who frequented all those places, so I would go visiting them and things like that. It was always a draw to do it, but this is my hometown.
Well, after school, we didn't participate in a lot of sports, only because my father worked for the newspaper, so we were paper boys. We went down and we grabbed our paper bags and went down to the Sentinel and picked up our newspapers, and we had the fortunate roots of being on Main Street. I delivered to the high-rise apartments on 16 Pritchard, which at the time was all elderly people, and Rick,
I had
my cousin.
I had part of Main Street, which I shared with my cousin Steve. He had the upper end, and I had the lower end of Main Street. And we would go into all the stores that wanted to have the paper delivered, or apartments above the stores. A lot of people. It was funny because we had a dog. We had a black lab, Kippy, and I would bring the dog some days with me. And if the dog earlier in the day wanted to go looking for me, if the dog wanted to go looking for me, he would actually do the paper route without the newspapers. But he would go to each door. And if I skipped the door, if I skipped the store because they didn't get the paper, the dog would skip the store. And he, the people would tell us that he knew the route probably better than I did.
There are no neighborhoods anymore. There are no people hanging around anymore. There are no kids outside playing. And I won't start philosophizing on the internet and the Blackberries and things like that. But Main Street was the place to be growing up. That's where people hung out. You felt safe. You felt safe in your house. You felt safe in your neighborhoods. Of course, we didn't have the temptations there are nowadays, but it would be nice and I know everyone connected with Fitchburg is trying hard to revitalize the downtown because that's where the action should be.
Well, before I got to work, while I was in school, it was all music. Buddy Holly, I can remember the day I picked up the Sentinel. February 3rd, I think, or something, that Buddy Holly had died in a plane crash with Big Bopper and Richie Valens. And, there are seminal moments in your life, and especially as a kid, that you never forget. And once in a while, somebody will trigger a memory and it'll come back and I'll say, oh yeah, I forgot, I hadn't thought about that for like 60 years and here it is. I remember that, So that's a lot of fun to do. And so the point about school was the point about how is school different then than it is today. We had hops on Friday night. We never missed them. Do they have hops today? They don't have. I filmed a few myself. When I was going and when I was in school, we had hops at the YMCA, not only in the Oak Room, but the gym. And prior to that, it was City Hall. City Hall had a wonderful auditorium on the top floor. Huge, big stage, mirror ball in the center and of course, they used it when Jack Richards would come and we'd go to hops on Friday night, But we had Fabian, Fats Domino, people like that coming to Fitchburg and performing at City Hall.
I used to like coming home from school, and everybody used to have those roller skates with the keys, and we roller skated, and we never played in the house. The houses were little apartments. We lived in a two-family. My aunt and uncle lived upstairs. It was 5 small rooms, and we were 4 kids. So if it was nice out, even if it wasn't nice out, if it was nice out, it was play outside. If it was raining, it was go play on the porch. So either way, you were outside. I feel bad for kids today. We could go anywhere.
We had a uncle, my Uncle Rainey, and he lived right next door to our house. Was kind of a duplex, and they lived. And he was a police officer for many years in the city of Fitchburg, and he was very influential in our lives. Just the fact that he was a police officer, you looked up to him. He was a huge part of this community. As being a protector of us.
We had a Uncle George Kane. George was a firefighter, and it was another person that you looked up to. And part of the paper route, my cousin Steve had the one half of Main Street, and I would go on his paper route, and he'd come on mine, and we'd kind of hang out in the good days. If it was bad weather, we'd want to get our paper routes done and go home. But if it was a good day, we'd just kind of do the paper routes together. And part of his paper route was the fire station, and got to go through the fire station and talk to the guys. We'd go into the alarm room, drop the paper, come through the back way of the old fire station on Oliver Street and drop one off at the booth there. And sometimes we'd have a soda. They had a soda machine. We'd stop, have a soda, and so that was kind of a big influence on my life, being a firefighter now.
I mean, I could leave in the morning and she'll say, "Be home for supper." She had no clue where we were. We were on Rollstone Hill. One day we walked all the way up to Wachusett Mountain. But I was a little older, maybe 12. But we used to go on hikes. We used to call them a hobo pack. We'd take a bandana and put our sandwich and some food and a stick. We thought we were hobos. And we would hike. We walked everywhere.
John Citrino was a close friend of mine. We'd hung around together. His kids were young at the time. I wasn't married. We jogged together up behind the high school, behind the hospital, and become close friends. I had gotten on here when I was appointed here. I was just turned 20 years old. It was one day after my 20th birthday. And, at that age, you just got to put on a great job. We know it was a dangerous job. My dad had done it. And John had become a close friend.
I knew John very well because every time I used to ride by him, he was standing outside the Water Street Fire Station. Of course, you know that he could make a siren with his note, he put his hands up to his mouth, and you thought you were really hearing a real siren. He could do it. That was his claim to fame, Bozo Citrino and his siren. He could just put his hands up to his mouth and make the noise of a siren. You'd think it was a siren. And every time a cruiser would go by, and if I was in it, I'd say hi to him, and he'd go over the 5th Street Bridge, and you could hear John in the background with his siren noise.
That night of March 4th, 1977, we had actually gone to EMT school for the previous 6 months. And Jack Mulcahy and myself had gotten our marks that day. And we went to Water Street Station to see if Bozo had gotten his. And about 7 o'clock that night, and he says, no. He called home. Terry says, no, the mark didn't come in. You'll get it tomorrow. So we were going to go out and have a few beers and celebrate. And Bozo says, no, I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay the night shift. He could have taken the night off. He could have put in for a night off. No, I'm going to stay. He says, I'll catch up with you guys this weekend.
I was there. I was working the late shift, and I was walking down there. Back then, we had walking officers. I was walking. That's the P5 route. We had 4 or 5 officers walking back then, and when that blaze went up, I was there.
At about 2 in the morning, we had a severe explosion, backdraft of a building. A number of people were hurt. My brother Jimmy was in that fire, was injured. We had 7, 8 firefighters seriously injured, and Bozo lost his life.
They found John under some timbers, and I carried him out. I was one of the 6 guys that carried him out on a stretcher from the scene.
22 years old, I was just a little over 22. That was a huge impact on both my life and my career here. And, knock on wood, our goal has been to never lose another firefighter here as long as I'm, responsible for him. And we'll continue to do that till the day I retire.
When I am called to duty, God, whenever flames may rage, give me the strength to save some life, whatever be its age. Help me embrace a little child before it is too late, or save an older person from the horror of that fate. Enable me to be alert and hear the weakest shout, and quickly and efficiently to put the fire out. I want to fill my calling and to give the best in me, to guard my every neighbor and protect his property. And if, according to my fate, I am to lose my life, please bless with your protecting hand my children and my wife.
My plan was to, get into radio, and it got sidetracked at first. I mean, here I'm working at FATV, so I'm in the television end of things, and that's the way it started. Because I went to school at Northeast Broadcasting School, second and third floors above Hayes Bickford Restaurant on Boylston Street, right across from the Prue. Anyway, but I ended up interning at Channel 2 in Boston. So, and then they hired me after the internship was over. So I was there for like a year and a half. So it started in TV, and I'm thinking, am I ever going to do this radio thing? The job ended there, and I came back to Fitchburg and ended up working for the George Chatfield empire. George owned WFGL, WFMP, which is now WXLO, the Montechusett Review, and the Muzak franchise for this area. And that's who I started working for initially, because there was nothing in radio at the time, and plus I had no experience. So that's what I started to do, but then, ease into little weekend night gigs and whatever, and so I started. But getting back to your question about that, it was a great time for Fitchburg. Fitchburg had gone through some tough times. At this point, the major industries in Fitchburg were still here. The paper companies were here. GE was here. Simon Saw and Steel was going full blast. And all of a sudden, but we had these older mayors. We had Hedley Bray, we had George Burke, and then this 25-year-old kid who was on the city council, Bill Flynn, decides to run for mayor. And this happened just about the time that I had come back to Fitchburg. So I was at the radio station, even though at that point I wasn't working in radio, but I was in the building. And and Tom Connery was doing news at WFGL at the time, and he was close to Bill Flynn. So, and then I never really had been involved in politics before, or been that close to it. And I saw this campaign start, and it was like nothing I had ever seen in politics. I mean, here was a guy who was only, 3 years older than I was, and he got elected. And I still have the tapes of some of those campaign things, and it was amazing. But it was a great time. And then after he was elected, I remember, one thing I remember, Yankee Magazine, after he was elected, did a story on him. And of course, Yankee Magazine goes all over the country because people who either had roots here or whatever that subscribe to it or want to come here. And I remember the first time the U.S. Army Field Band came to town, and it was a big deal. They played up at the high school. And so they introduced the conductor, the commander of the band. And the first thing he said when he got up there was how much he was looking forward to coming to Fitchburg, because he had just finished reading an article about Fitchburg's mayor, Bill Flynn. So it was, it was heady company, and it was a good time.
Well, my father being involved with City Hall, I think one of the people that stand out in my mind were some of the mayors at City Hall. Because there was always stories about them. But as far as other political figures, I don't think I was really involved politically that much to worry too much about that. I think the people that had maybe the most influence in my life as far as that goes would be probably my parents more than anything.
The biggest decision we had to make back in the 60s was whether we rolled our cuff up on our khakis or not. And then you were called lunchies. And if you didn't, and you put your hair back like that, you were called packies. And the packies would hang out down Morin Square, and the lunchies would hang out around where the old Woolworths were. And we weren't enemies. We were just, that was our way of, our statement of our teenageness.
There's a shot of a fire in Clegon where the guys had got blown, the firefighters were blown out the window, and they were hanging on the sign of the building. And it was just a right place, right moment. But
he was there.
He was using an old Graflex camera at the time, and the old Graflex, you got like one shot. You flipped you'd pull the film out, and he got two shots of them hanging on the sign. Not like today where you can just hit the shutter and rattle off 7-8 photos a second. It was.
You had to be prepared back then. Now you can kind of take a lot of pictures and pick out the good ones. Back then you had to be good at your craft because you might only get one shot at that good picture.
I was riding with Sergeant Gates when the Dan Chan's robbery went down. Pulled into the driveway, the parking lot there, and proceeded directly to the door. There was an off-duty police officer in there by the name of Carl Pohl, who was now retired. He was carrying an off-duty gun. Remember it like yesterday. The person that robbed the store was a former employee of the store. He also had a gun. When we pulled in to the parking lot, and we see people running, we could hear shots fired. Bang, bang, bang. I said, oh my God. So we got to the front door and we learned that one of the employees had robbed the restaurant. So the person that robbed the restaurant ran behind all the old, like I said, there was a King's there and the Radio Shack area and around, ran into the woods back there. So it was a massive search for him. We spent 2 or 3 hours down there, saturated the entire area, and lo and behold, we found him in the woods and we pulled him out. And when we pulled him out, we noticed that his left eye was completely gone. Put him into an ambulance and brought him to the hospital. Myself and Arthur Destre-Maison went into the ambulance with him. Looked at him and said, Kenny, because he was a friend of ours. That was we used to stop in there now and then after work. And Kenny was the doorman there. He greeted you when you went in there. Said, Kenny, what are you doing? What are you doing? Didn't want to talk about it. Said, let's get you to the hospital because you need some serious, serious surgery. And his left eye was gone. To this day, I think he still wears a glass eye. So that was kind of horrific because we knew him. He was a great kid. And you very seldom at that time, when I was a rookie, when I was going through the process, the Chinese people, the Asian people, we didn't deal with them as people that committed crimes. It was very, very odd to have somebody of his nationality commit a crime back then. Now it's a little bit different. No police officers were shot. There were shots fired by Fitchburg police officers. We don't know who hit Kenny because several of us fired our weapon. In those days, of course, that ballistics was not the art that it is now, so I mean, it would have been kind of difficult to tell who in fact shot him. I did not discharge my gun that night. No, I didn't. I was one of the few that didn't. Sergeant Gates did. I believe the off-duty police officer may have fired his weapon, but I didn't fire my weapon, no.
The city would go through a period of darkness and despair. The loss of industry and economic depression would gain a foothold here as it had all across the country. But there would be a light that kept shining. The common bond of those who have made this place their home is strong. Moving forward, the city is now stronger today than it has been in years.
We see a real presence of Fitchburg State University in the city. The mayor just hired an economic development director who has a strong marketing background, as well as his involvement in the arts. And so we see the presence of the Fitchburg Art Museum. So I think those are three key strong institutions that if I were a business, that I would want to be around.
There was a time not too long ago where I was not really optimistic. Things were bad, very bad. But I think Mayor Wong has gotten things going in the right direction. The big problem, I mean, in life and everything, is money. And Fitchburg was in really tough shape. And I remember when she ran the first time, one of her main supporters and campaign workers for her opponent said to me at one point, well, it doesn't really matter who's elected because the city's going into receivership anyway. And you know, why is this candidate running? But anyway, but it didn't.
To me, there appears to be a lot going on. If you go out towards Route 2, I drove up to the Grand Wolf Lodge area the other day and took a peek. That place is going to be enormous. That's a huge investment in the city. And as you leave that area and you start to come into Fitchburg, they're building that brand new Wachusett train station, which is again going to be a big attraction for people. That's going to be another huge investment. Driving from there, coming into the city, down the River Street area, you have that new Riverside Commons apartment complex that's enormous. So there's a private investor that's investing an awful lot of money in town. And then coming further into the downtown area, you have the Fitchburg Art Museum, which is second to none in the state as far as an art museum. They're working kind of at the moment on the B.F. Brown School, converting that into artist live-in workspaces. If that gets off the ground, that's going to be huge. And then traveling down Main Street even a little further, the college is going to be investing in the corner of Main and North. A private investor, I believe, is going to be developing that into possibly some commercial space with apartments above. That's going to be a big force in the lower Main Street area. And then, of course, Fitchburg State University. It's huge in town. So I'm pretty positive about the future of Fitchburg. There seems to be a lot of investment lately. People can come to Fitchburg, buy a piece of property. Property is not very expensive. There's some beautiful homes architecturally. I think I think Fitchburg is going to be discovered again.
You know, Rollstone Hill used to be quarries. All you saw was granite up there for miles around. It's all filled in now. You can't see a thing. It's all green, lush. In 50 years, more so. Be more beautiful, more greens, and Riverfront Park, you know, is still going to move on, and we're still going to build things along the way. But I think it's just going to be more beautiful. People will be happy living in Fitchburg, Leominster.
I do feel positive about the city of Fitchburg. Yes, I do. I think that this police department in particular has made insurmountable gains, let's say. The people of Fitchburg should be proud of the Fitchburg Police Department because these guys just give it 100% every day of the week. I mean, it's just incredible how hard they work. Of course, I see it because I'm the supervisor. I run a shift of, well, sometimes, not today, I've got 6 plus 4, I got 10 people and a sergeant out there. And I know by 6 o'clock tonight, you know, something's going to happen where we're booking a prisoner or we're doing something or something's happening. They're very proactive, very proactive. And of course, that's as a result of what's going on with the administration here. We've made a lot of changes, and it's for the better. And hopefully it continues.
You know, with Ann being an art instructor in Fitchburg at the high school, she likes art and she likes painting. I think one of her dreams was to always have a little gallery in a studio where she could paint. So this kind of was something that kind of fit real well in our retirement. I've always been a collector. Even though I do not paint, I don't really have any idea how to do that. I've always liked that, and I've liked collecting art. So when it came time to retire, we thought, geez, this might be a good thing to get into. And it could be kind of a nice low-pressure job. We don't have to be there 7 days a week, but it would be very enjoyable. So we scouted around the city. We wanted to be in Fitchburg, and we wanted to be on Main Street. And we always liked the Upper Common area. It's just kind of a picturesque part of town. So we kind of looked around and waited for something to come up that might work for us. Found this spot, and it really has been a lot of fun.
We've got the college students. We need to bring them down North Street to Main Street, and once they get on Main Street, maybe they'll venture up, you know. But that's happening now where, you know, we've got a project going now where people are gonna, the college kids are gonna wanna come down North Street to the corner of Main, and then from there, what happens is...
And I think we got some good people working on that, you know, trying to bring those things to Fitchburg, trying to utilize what we have and make them better, you know. So I think Fitchburg's got a really good future, you know, and a lot of good people working on that future.
I think the Burbank-Leominster split was a big event for this city. And I think what a lot of people don't know about Burbank Hospital is even before I came back, when my father first came to town, a lot of people came at the same time, and people from Boston, and even in the 60s, we were training surgeons that would come in from Boston. We had vascular surgeons, we had thoracic surgeons. As a community hospital, it was a really big deal, and I'm not sure the people of Fitchburg know how lucky they are to have received the quality of care as far back as the 50s and 60s, and certainly through to today.
What about 2064? You know, people are looking back to 1964, and I can remember playing basketball at St. Joseph's, and a little Gazorian kid saying, "The Beatles are on tonight." We're playing basketball, and he's thinking he's going to watch Ed Sullivan. We were going to all watch Ed Sullivan. And now, what about 2064? What's the city going to be like?
I really think Fitchburg is on the upswing.
Fitchburg still has a lot to offer. They're going through some hard times, but I think you can sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel. That things are starting to turn around, or at least I hope they do.
You can probably say we've been here all our lives and why, but we don't really have any need or reason to go anywhere else.
I feel more positive now than I did before because of the people.
Met a lot of friends that you still see all the time. You know, no matter where you go in the city, you always know somebody. You know, you always somebody you knew from 30 years ago, and it's like you can start a conversation like it was yesterday.
Oh, I have great pride in the city of Fitchburg. If somebody were to say to me, "Here's, $500,000, do it over again," would you do it over again? I'd say no. No, I wouldn't. I've had 42 great years here.
My pride is still there. You know, I've been in Fitchburg for 63 of my 66 years, and I do feel a sense of pride.
I think my number one thing would just be hardworking people, and number two, great traditions for a city that was, was a great place to grow up as a kid.
The city has been a success because the generation that brought me up worked hard, made sure their kids got an education, and then went on. And a lot of them did leave, but some stayed.
You know, we'll be seeing things here and down in the North Street, Main Street corridor coming up in the near future that are going to attract more people to Fitchburg, and it's coming back. It's never going to be what it used to be. I'm not looking for that.
I think it has to utilize the assets that it currently has in order to bring the future, into sight. And I think it's got a lot of great potential.
It's been great for me. I met my husband here. I've raised two lovely children who are doing well. And so I most definitely would do it over again.
Fitchburg, for me, and fortunately for a lot of other people, the thing that keeps us here is it's home.
All that I see is panic everywhere. It's down on the street, written on the faces of the people that I meet, with shoulders bent down in defeat. I keep my head down, keep my eyes down, and don't ever look around. I feel I'm drowning because I can't figure it out. I think I must be losing my mind. Yeah, nothing's ever gonna change. It all stays the same. Nobody even seems to care. Coming, going, fevers growing. It's such a shame, 'cause today it's the stronger survive. Behind the stars, shining silver, there are so many scars. But all I see is just how powerful we think we are. Driving around in our very big cars. So get out of my way, it's time for payday.
I thought I told you never to interrupt me while I'm working.